Chapter 1. Legacy of Das Kapital. It has been more than 150 years since the publication of the first volume of Das Kapital, yet the work remains at the heart of lively debates. It is impossible to find another philosopher who has had such a profound social impact on the world. The fact that the Communist Manifesto is the second best-selling book in history, with the Bible being the first, is an indication of this statement. This influence and popularity, which has defied time, stems from Marxism's power to explain reality. Marx and Engels successfully analyzed the capitalist system based on the tendencies of their time, exposed its contradictions, and pointed the way to transforming this decaying order. This is why their ideas remain relevant and impactful today, particularly after the 2008 crisis, which is considered one of the four major crises of capitalism. Interest in Das Kapital increased. Even bourgeois ideologues acknowledged the validity of Marx's analysis of capitalism. In a May 2017 article, The Economist argued that Marx had become more relevant than ever, citing the rise in poverty, the concentration and centralization of capital, and the growing power of finance as evidence. The article even suggested the best way to avoid becoming Marx's next victim is to start taking him seriously, implying that without steps to reduce capitalism's savagery, it is impossible to escape his critique. Chapter 2. Capital is built on blood and tears. Contrary to the hypocritical rhetoric of figures like Warren Buffett, who advocate for a humane capitalism to protect the long-term interests of capital, Das Kapital reveals the true face of capital. Marx dismantles the capitalist narrative that portrays the capitalist as the legitimate owner of wealth due to their intelligence, entrepreneurship, risk-taking, and creativity. Instead, he shows that capital is nothing but the embodiment of the stolen labor of past generations of workers. Moreover, the initial accumulation of capital required for capitalist development is rooted in plunder, regardless of geography. In England, which Marx analyzed, this primitive accumulation was based on the enslavement and plunder of colonized peoples all around the world, the dispossession of workers from their lands, and the intense exploitation of the working class. Marx was not exaggerating when he wrote, "If money comes into the world with a congenital bloodstain on one cheek, then capital comes dripping from head to toe, from every pore, with blood and dirt." Chapter 3. Key to scientific socialism is the analysis of capitalism. Marx was right when he said, "The credit for discovering the existence of classes and class struggle in modern society does not belong to me." However, it was he who revealed the objective dynamics of class struggle in modern society. While Marx began his analysis of the capitalist system by accepting the labor theory of value, he went beyond its contradictions to develop the theory of surplus value, which allows us to understand the nature of capitalism. For Marx, who believed that to be radical is to understand things by their root, these contributions are indispensable for understanding the dynamics of capitalism. The concept of surplus value exposes the source of exploitation in the capitalist system, sheds light on the driving force of class struggle, and lays the groundwork for socialism to become a scientific endeavor. The theory of surplus value also reveals which contradictions within capitalism create opportunities for social transformation and how the foundations for a future society are being laid today. As Ernest Mandel explains in his work, Marx's Capital, Marx himself considered the discovery of the concept of surplus value, which represents the total profits, interest, and rent of the bourgeois class, to be his fundamental theoretical breakthrough. This concept links the historical science of society with the science of capitalist economy by explaining both the origins and content of class struggle and the dynamics of capitalist society. For Marx, the starting point for analyzing capitalism is production, and at the heart of capitalist production lies the commodity. What distinguishes capitalism as a generalized commodity economy from earlier societies is not just the scale of commodity production, but a complete transformation of social relations. In earlier societies, production was centered on use value. Goods were produced for immediate consumption or to satisfy the desires of the ruling class. Although there are products produced to be sold, money in this exchange only acts as an intermediary to reach new products. Money served merely as a means to acquire new products. Capitalism, however, represents a fundamental shift in the purpose of production. The capitalist's goal is not to meet their own needs or luxuries, but to make money. As Marx put it, the production of surplus value, or the extraction of surplus labor, is the specific purpose and raison d'etre of capitalist production. Chapter 4. Class struggle must continue. While revealing the source of surplus value, Marx starts from the fact that labor power, like all commodities, has a two-way character: use and exchange value. The exchange value of labor power is the socially necessary labor time required to produce it. Socially necessary labor time is the time required to produce a commodity under normal production conditions, with the average skill and intensity of labor at the time. Wages, which cover the cost of sustaining the worker's life and raising new generations of workers, constitute the exchange value of labor power. The use value of labor power, its utility, for the capitalist, lies in the worker's ability to produce new commodities. The value produced by workers is not the same as the cost of reproducing their labor power, and this difference is the source of the surplus value that flows into the pockets of capital. The fact that half a day's labor is necessary to keep the worker alive for 24 hours does not prevent them from working a full day. Therefore, the value of labor power and the value it creates in the labor process are entirely different magnitudes. What the capitalist considers when purchasing labor power is precisely this difference between the two values. The worker labors only part of the day to earn their wage. The rest is effectively devoted to enriching the capitalist. Marx identifies this unpaid labor time as the source of surplus value. Marx explains that the source of the capitalist's exploitation of workers lies in this unpaid labor time, which is also the root of the class struggle between the working class and capital, whether overt or covert, intense or weak. Capital constantly seeks to increase the worker's unpaid labor time to expand surplus value production. The purpose of using machinery, like any tool that increases labor productivity, is to cheapen commodities and reduce the portion of the working day that the worker labors for themselves, thereby extending the portion they give unpaid to the capitalist. Extending the workday, raising the retirement age, reducing weekly leave, cutting wages and social benefits, and undermining workers' organizational gains. These are everyday occurrences in workplaces around us. Neoliberalism, which has dominated the world for over 30 years and now awaits its demise, is precisely the name for capital's assault on workers' gains to secure surplus value production. If the driving force of the capitalist system is to obtain greater surplus value, the only way to increase surplus value is to increase the worker's unpaid labor time. Marx identifies two methods for this: absolute surplus value and relative surplus value. The surplus value produced by extending the working day is absolute surplus value. The surplus value resulting from shortening necessary labor time and the consequent change in the proportions of the two parts of the working day is relative surplus value. Absolute surplus value production has physical limits. The worker's capacity to work after meeting all their needs is clearly constrained by the 24-hour day. Relative surplus value production, however, offers much broader possibilities. It relies on reducing the time it takes for workers to produce the equivalent of their wages through various methods. Marx describes three ways to achieve this: increasing labor productivity, intensifying labor, and reducing the prices of subsistence goods. The most common method for increasing relative surplus value is to boost labor productivity through new production techniques. Chapter 5. Crisis is inevitable. The pressure capitalists feel to constantly increase surplus value is not merely due to personal greed. The system's dynamics leave them no other choice for survival. For Marx, accumulation is not the capitalist hoarding money, it is the conversion of surplus value into capital and its reinvestment. The decisive effect of competition between capitals is that it forces them to behave as capital. In the capitalist system, the realization of surplus value, which is indispensable for capital, requires not only the production of commodities, but also their sale. Under competitive pressure, capitalists seeking to capture more market share constantly push to reduce the value of commodities. Marx notes that the law of value determined by labor becomes the coercive law of competition. The cheapening of commodities requires a reduction in the socially necessary labor time that determines their value, forcing capitalists to constantly adopt new techniques and increase labor productivity. This drive to increase surplus value leads to the growing intensity of machinery in production. Marx defines the organic composition of capital as the ratio between constant capital, represented by means of production, raw materials, auxiliary materials, and tools, and variable capital, represented by labor power, which undergoes value transformation in the production process and produces surplus value. This ratio is also a measure of labor productivity. As labor productivity increases, the organic composition of capital grows. However, it is not machines and raw materials, which Marx calls dead labor, as they embody the labor of past generations, that create surplus value, but labor power. Thus, while the amount of capital required for production, both constant and variable, grows, the surplus value produced does not increase proportionally. As a result, the rate of profit, the ratio of surplus value to total capital, tends to fall. In this context, capitalists tend to shift their investments toward industries with higher profit rates. The flow of capital from one sector to another tends to equalize profit differentials. The result is the formation of a general rate of profit, which reflects the relationship between total surplus value produced and total capital invested. Marx notes that profit rates tend to fall in capitalism. The tendency of the rate of profit to fall is a specific expression of the continuous development of social labor productivity under the capitalist mode of production. Increasing labor productivity means using more machinery and raw materials per worker, raising the organic composition of capital. This means that while the capitalist invests enormous amounts of capital in production, they do not receive a corresponding increase in surplus value. Since the sole source of surplus value is labor power, the rising organic composition of capital leads to a falling rate of profit. This tendency is proof of Marx's assertion that the real barrier to capitalist production is capital itself. Unfortunately, Marx's analysis of crises is one of his most misinterpreted ideas. It is often portrayed as if Marx anticipated a final crisis that would end capitalism. This is far from the truth. For Marx, crises are short-term and forced solutions that arise from the need to overcome the contradictions created by falling profit rates. Crises are processes through which capitalism reorganizes and restructures itself, and they do not affect all capital equally. Some will emerge stronger, while others will disappear. This is how Marx described the concentration and centralization of capital, which will only grow stronger. Marx saw capitalism as a dynamic system, distinct from the static class societies that preceded it. The bourgeoisie cannot exist without constantly revolutionizing the instruments of production, and thereby the relations of production, and with them, the whole relations of society. Thus, left to its own devices, capitalism has the potential to overcome crises at the expense of the working class. However, the revolutionary intervention of the working class can put an end to this trajectory and use the exceptional conditions created by crises to make a revolutionary leap toward a classless, exploitation-free society. Chapter 6. Conclusion. Das Kapital is the product of 30 years of labor and is, in the truest sense, a masterpiece. Although Marx did not live to complete the work as he intended or even to see the publication of all its volumes, its impact has far surpassed his era. Drawing on the tendencies of its time, Capital provides the most powerful projection of capitalism, forcing even its enemies, bourgeois ideologues, to take it seriously and, when necessary, acknowledge its insights. Socialists, too, must give Capital its due. No matter how complex or challenging it may seem at first, engaging with this work is essential. To scientifically understand the contradictions of capitalism, which we seek to eradicate from human history, requires this effort.